was apparently very mouthy and had an opinion on everything, which, well, it didn't really win her any sympathy points. That's for sure. Eventually, Ferrari's sales manager, Girolamo Gardini, confronted Enzo and presented him with a letter signed by 8 of his colleagues demanding Laura's resignation. Girolamo's direct approach didn't really work though, since instead, Enzo fired all 9 employees who had signed the letter. This was a huge loss of talent for Ferrari, and the event came to be known as the Great Walkout. The timing of this scandal couldn't have been worse, since Ferrari had suffered the death of 4 of its drivers over the past 2 years. All of Ferrari's developing models were put on hold, and it took Enzo a year before it could finally resume production. Although the Great Walkout was the most disastrous scandal in Ferrari's history, it can be argued that it was in fact a blessing in disguise. Enzo hired a lot of young engineers to fill the gap left by his former employees, and these newcomers designed one of Ferrari's most iconic Grand Tourers, the Ferrari 250 GTO. Only 39 of these beauties were ever produced, which is actually pretty surprising, since the International Automobile Federation required at least 100 cars to be built before approving the model for racing. Enzo managed to cheat his way to approval by numbering the chassis out of sequence, and when the inspectors came to visit, he shuffled the cars around in different locations. Enzo got the 250 GTO approved, and it ended up winning the World Sports Car Championship for 3 years in a row. The few 250 GTOs left in the world have become extremely valuable. In fact, in 1914, one car sold for over $38 million at the Bonhams Quail Lodge in California. The 1960s ended up being one of Ferrari's best decades. They also saw the release of Ferrari's first Grand Tourer equipped with a transaxle, the Ferrari 275. And its successor, the Ferrari Daytona. Towards the end of the 60s, demand for Ferrari cars was becoming so large that Enzo couldn't build them fast enough. In order to secure investment for the company's expansion, Enzo sold 50% of the company to Fiat, which back then and to this day remains the largest car manufacturer in Italy. With this newfound capital, Enzo expanded Ferrari's operations, and he even had enough money left over to finance one of his lesser-known ideas. He wanted to see whether he could start making cheaper sports cars that he could sell to a wider audience. He didn't want to compromise the luxurious exclusivity of the Ferrari brand though, so he created a new car brand which he called Dino, in honor of his firstborn son, Alfredo. Alfredo had died 10 years earlier from Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a rare degenerative disease that progressively destroys the muscles of the legs, arms, and eventually the heart. Alfredo was only 25 when he died, and at the time he was developing a V6 engine. Enzo was shattered by his son's death, and in his honor, he created the Dino brand, which featured 3 main models up until its discontinuation in 1976. The 206 GT and the 246 GT used the V6 engine Alfredo had developed. Though the 308 GT4 had a more powerful V8 engine. During the 1970s, Ferrari won 3 drivers' championships thanks to the performance of Niki Lauda and Jody Scheckter, but Ferrari didn't manage to win that title again for 20 years. The situation further worsened in 1982 with the death of Gilles Villeneuve in the Belgian Grand Prix. The tragedy shook the racing world, since Gillis was one of the most popular drivers at the time. In 1984, Ferrari produced the iconic Testarossa, which shares the name of Testarossa from the 1950s, although this model's name is spelled as a single word. Surprisingly enough, the Testarossa from the 80s didn't appear in any official race. Even so, it's still one of the most widely recognizable Ferraris since it was featured in the final 3 seasons of Miami Vice. In 1987, Enzo celebrated the 40th anniversary of his company by releasing the Ferrari F40. But just 1 year Enzo's death cast a bad light on the model. Speculators quadrupled the price of the F40 in the hopes of profiting from the car's reputation as the last model personally approved by Enzo. In fact, estimates from 1990 state that barely 10% of all F40s sold were actually used for driving. Enzo's death caused a dramatic shift in the company's ownership. His only living heir was his second son Piero, who inherited his father's 50% stake in Ferrari and promptly sold most of it to Fiat for an undisclosed sum in exchange for becoming vice chairman. In the end, Fiat ended up owning 90% of the company, with the remaining 10% in the hands of Piero. Despite the death of Enzo, however, the 1990s turned out to be a revival period for Ferrari's racing team. In 1993, Ferrari hired a new general manager, Jean Todt, who would eventually become the CEO of Ferrari and the president of the International Automobile Federation. Under his guidance, Ferrari acquired Michael Schumacher in 1996. Now, at the time, Ferrari's Formula One team was in horrible shape. They hadn't won a single driver's championship since 1979. Their pit stop crew was a running joke, and their V12 engine couldn't match the lighter, more fuel-efficient V10s of their competitors. Michael Schumacher's decision to join Ferrari was surprising to say the least, although to be fair, they did offer him $60 million for a 2-year contract. Even today, Ferrari consistently outbids their competitors to get the best drivers. In the 2016 season, for example, the most well-paid driver is Ferrari's Sebastian Vettel, who earns a cozy $50 million per year. But back to Schumacher. In the 1996 Drivers' Championship, he placed third by winning 3 races for Ferrari, which was more than they had won in the previous 5 years. Schumacher's stellar performance didn't really start until the year 2000, when he defeated McLaren's Mika Hakkinen to win Ferrari their first Drivers' Championship in 20 years. Then, he went on to win the Drivers' Championship 4 more times in a row, becoming the most decorated Formula One driver in history. His reign during these 5 years was unprecedented. In 2001, he won the Drivers' Championship with a 58-point lead, and for the next season, his lead was even larger at 67 points. It wouldn't be until 2005 that Schumacher was finally dethroned by the up-and-coming Fernando Alonso, who would eventually secure 2 titles for Renault. The early 2000s were the time when Ferrari truly re-emerged on the global racing scene. Schumacher's performance helped Ferrari become the team with the most victories in both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, an achievement they hold to this day. Ferrari's highlight car from the period was the Ferrari Enzo. It was released in 2002 and it became the first Ferrari to use the new generation of V12 engines, the F140, which is still used in contemporary models. Ferrari's latest model is from 2013 and it is aptly named La Ferrari. with the idea that it is the definitive Ferrari sports car, with the stunning price tag of $1.4 million. Only 499 LaFerraris have been built so far. Recently, Ferrari announced they'll be building a 501 to the benefit of those affected by the deadly earthquake that struck central Italy in August. Interestingly enough, Fiat decided to get rid of their involvement in Ferrari, and so on January 3rd, 2016, they took the company public. Although that came as a surprise to Ferrari enthusiasts, the move was actually pretty calculated. Ferrari had always enjoyed full autonomy from Fiat's management team, so the transition wouldn't be anywhere near as difficult for them as it would be for a regular company. Fiat also benefits from the split because they're short on capital for their expensive plans to reinvigorate their Jeep and Alfa Romeo brands by 2018. Of course, if you look at Fiat's share price, it's easy to see that investors were not too happy with the Ferrari spin-off. But it's still too early to tell whether the move was actually successful. Ferrari, on the other hand, seem to be going great, and they're currently preparing to release 350 special edition cars for their upcoming 70th anniversary. So far, they're planning on making special editions of their 5 current models, except the LaFerrari, whose production ends later this year. There's not a lot of info out just yet, but knowing Ferrari's production team, it's safe to say their anniversary will probably be a success. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This is our first video in over a month, so it's clear that we had some scheduling issues. I know, this is like the 3rd time I'm promising this, but I think those issues are resolved. So, we'll be going back to our regular release schedule of 1 video every 2 weeks. If you'd like to watch our previous video, you can click over here. It's about the history of Monsanto, how they started as a chemical producer and eventually became the largest seed manufacturer in the world. If you want to watch the full Behind the Business series, you can click over there, and you can subscribe to our channel by clicking here in the middle. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and as always, stay smart.